Welcome to NTD Good Morning.
Here are today's top stories. Israel has identified the remains of 3 more hostages released by Hamas terrorists. With 20 bodies still in Hamas captivity, what's next under the new peace deal?
The Senate fails again to pass a government funding bill, keeping the shutdown in place as both parties trade blame over spending and layoffs.
President Trump honoring Charlie Kirk on what would have been his 32nd birthday. And the president warning that aid to Argentina depends on the upcoming election results as President Milei visited the White House yesterday.
The nation's highest court will weigh in on race-based redistricting. We take a look at how this would impact the congressional map.
Major news organizations refuse to sign the Pentagon's new press rules. What's in the rules? And responses from both sides.
The world-famous Radio City Rockettes gear up for the holiday season. This year's Christmas spectacular promises to be bigger and better than ever before.
This is NTD Good Morning, live from our global headquarters in New York City. Here are Stephanie Cox and Carrie Dunst.
It's great to have you with us. Thank you.
Today is Wednesday, October 15th. You're watching NTD Good Morning. In today's top news, Israel is continuing to receive the remains of hostages returned from the Gaza Strip.
The Prime Minister's office says 3 more bodies were identified today after being handed over by Hamas terrorists. The remains include 20-year-old Tamir Nimrodi, killed in captivity, 35-year-old Uriel Baruch, slain during the October 7th Nova Festival attack, and 53-year-old Eitan Levy, missing for 2 months before his death was confirmed.
A 4th body returned overnight is still being identified, with Israeli media reports suggesting it may not belong to a hostage.
The bodies were transferred through the International Committee of the Red Cross and taken to the National Center for Forensic Medicine in Tel Aviv. Hamas still has the bodies of 20 hostages it says it will return under the peace agreement. NTD reached out to the Red Cross for more information. They responded saying they are restricted in commenting as the operation continues.
Israel temporarily cut humanitarian aid into Gaza to 300 trucks a day, blaming Hamas for delaying the handover of remains, though Israeli media now say the Rafah crossing may reopen later this week. Meanwhile, some families of deceased hostages are still waiting for the bodies of their loved ones, and the newly released hostages are adapting to their new lives. NTD's Jason Perry has the update and a warning: this report contains footage that some viewers may find disturbing.
A day after being released from Hamas captivity, the former hostages are still being monitored at hospitals. On Tuesday, some of their family members gave an update on their progress so far.
So Eitan was released less than 24 hours ago, so he's not sharing so much. He's just like throwing here and there some stories. He asked for meat, and when he got this plate with this huge piece of meat, he was excited, and I saw tears in his eyes.
We focused, to be honest, on being a family again, on laughing together, laughing at each other, being in the sense of comfort and safety, something we did not have in the last 2 years, and we try to embrace them as much as possible.
Meanwhile, the family members of deceased hostages are still waiting for the bodies of their loved ones to be returned. The Hamas terrorist group released the bodies of 4 hostages on Monday, and they were later identified as Captain Daniel Peretz, Yossi Sharabi, Guy Iluz, and Nepalese hostage Bipin Joshi. A spokesperson for the International Committee of the Red Cross gave an update on Tuesday.
Considering the intensity of the conflict over the last days, particularly in Gaza City. Now, are they in Gaza City? Are they in the south of the Gaza Strip? Are they in the middle of the Gaza Strip? These are information that we don't have.
And on Tuesday night, the Red Cross picked up additional bodies of hostages from Hamas terrorists in the Gaza Strip. President Trump reportedly gave Hamas the okay to conduct internal security operations in the territory for a period of time. However, a video posted to social media on Monday shows the Hamas terrorist group performing a public execution of 7 individuals. President Trump said this about Hamas.
Well, they're going to disarm, and because they said they were going to disarm. And if they don't disarm, we will disarm them.
And he added this about Hamas returning the bodies of the deceased hostages.
Now, they misrepresented because we were told they had 26, 24 of dead hostages, if we can use those terms. And it seems as though they don't have that.
In another development in the Gaza Strip, Israeli troops opened fire on suspects who were reportedly approaching their military position. Israel also warned residents to follow their instructions and not approach troops deployed in the area. Jason Perry, NTD News.
Thanks to Jason for that report. And a vote in the Senate to fund the federal government failed again yesterday. The vote went down to defeat with 49 votes in favor and 45 votes opposed. NTD's Daniel Monahan has more on that measure, which needs 60 votes for it to pass.
On this vote, the ayes are 49, the nays are 45.
The Republican-sponsored continuing resolution failed 49 to 45 yesterday evening. Virtually all Republicans and a small number of Democrats supported the measure.
Federal workers, including law enforcement officers, missed part of their pay last Friday. But hey, at least life is getting better for Senate Democrats.
Senate Majority Leader John Thune quoted a CNN article from last week as saying that Democrats are prepared to keep on with this shutdown for several more weeks.
I guess Democrats are not going to be satisfied until military families and government workers are lining up at food banks or visiting payday lenders or simply charging necessary items like milk and bread on their credit cards.
Democrats argue they are trying to keep Affordable Care Act subsidies from expiring for millions of Americans who purchase insurance on Obamacare exchanges.
If Republicans remain dug in, the American people will hold them responsible for rising health care costs.
Most Democrats have supported an alternative measure that would permanently extend enhanced subsidies under the Affordable Care Act or Obamacare. It would also add to other areas of health care spending. The Committee for a Responsible Federal Budget has said the package would add $1.5 trillion in debt over the following 10 years. The Trump administration has dismissed over 4,100 employees since October 1st, the day the government shutdown began. President Trump blamed the cuts on the shutdown. Since 1981, the U.S. has had 15 federal government shutdowns that furloughed hundreds of thousands of workers. Federal worker unions are suing to overturn the firings. The union said that implementing layoffs is not an essential service that can be performed during a government closure. A federal judge is due to hear the case on October 15th. The Pentagon confirms U.S. troops have been paid after President Trump redirected $8 billion from defense research funds during the shutdown. The White House says it's now working to ensure federal law enforcement officers also receive their paychecks. President Trump says his administration will soon release a list of Democrat programs to be permanently cut amid the ongoing government shutdown.
The Democrats are getting killed on the shutdown because we're closing up programs that are Democrat programs that we were opposed to. So we're being, and they're never going to come back in many cases.
Trump called some of the targeted initiatives socialist and semi-communist.
Closing up some of the most egregious socialist, semi-communist, probably not full communist, we're saving that for New York, but semi-communist programs, and we're closing them up.
Trump says Republican-backed programs will stay open, quote, because they work. The president was speaking at a White House meeting with Argentina's President Javier Milei. Daniel Monahan, NTD News.
And joining us now to discuss the shutdown live is Aaron Dusso. He's an associate professor of political science at Indiana University. Thanks for joining, Aaron. Politically, does the shutdown hurt or help either party in your view?
Right now, I don't think it's hurting or helping either. We had some polling released over the last few days, and both of these polls come to largely the same conclusion that America's pretty divided on who's to blame, with perhaps slight majority that's suggesting that Republicans are to blame, but really not too much, too big a divide between those two to suggest that Republicans are taking any type of brunt of this, blame.
And I do want to come back to some of that polling, but as we just heard, President Trump's Treasury was able to redirect funds to keep military paychecks flowing, and it's now looking to do the same with the federal police. How much wiggle room does the administration have from a cash flow perspective to shore up federal workers that he deems the most essential, at least politically, to his base, should the shutdown continue on for another couple weeks?
he actually doesn't have that much wiggle room at all, because the Constitution requires that any spending from the U.S. Treasury has to be approved by the U.S. Congress explicitly. And without Congress's approval, you can't just move money from one part of the government to another in order to fulfill the goals that you have as a president. Thus, there's has to be some creative accounting going on within the administration to figure out how they can move some money around in order to pay the individuals that they deem as worthy.
Now, federal workers are challenging his ability to even conduct layoffs during the shutdown. If he's able to do it, can he just cut away the priorities for the Democrats, giving him more leverage in these negotiations, as we heard in that last package where he said, I'm just going to keep cutting their programs that we didn't want in the first place?
Right. I mean, the reality is that the president can try to do lots of things. And so, some of the mantra that seems to exist in the, in this administration is that we can do it until someone stops us. And so if the president's going to, through the Office of Management and Budget is going to fire people, he's going to fire them. And we'll see, as, the unions and people take them to court to determine whether or not this was a legal firing. But that can take months and years to determine. Thus, as the first kind of actor, the president has an advantage right here.
And the last time Congress did a short-term funding bill, Senator Schumer took some flack from within his own party by voting in favor of it. He said why. He said he would rather see, a compromise than what he viewed as a worse result being the shutdown. But now here we are. Is this line in the sand the right place for Schumer and the Democrats to be showing resistance, or is there any potential for it to backfire?
Well, I think they chose the topic, and that's healthcare. And what for decades now, when you do polling to determine who do Americans trust with healthcare, Democrats are overwhelmingly the party that they trust with healthcare. And so this is essentially a home field advantage when it comes to the topic they chose to fight on. And so if they can't stand their ground on healthcare, it's not clear what issue the Democrats would actually be able to stand their ground on.
Understood. A very interesting point. Now, there are a few centrist Democrats supporting the continuing resolution, like Senator Fetterman. Within the Democratic Party, there seems to be two emerging factions. We have the self-described socialists and the more classic, call them like a JFK-styled centrist. Do you see any new charismatic leadership that is starting to emerge? And if so, which faction would you align them with?
When in the Senate, I don't see a lot of charismatic new factions arising, particularly with Chuck Schumer doesn't seem to be challenged within the Senate. Now, you have charismatic individuals rising out of the House, with Jasmine Crockett and AOC. Those individuals seem to be challenging the status quo within the Republican Party and probably have the biggest voice within the party that draws from public support, as they both have strong public support, and that would force Democratic leadership to listen to them.
Now, President Trump is gaining popularity abroad coming off this Middle East peace deal. Are there any signs that his policies, going back to your polling numbers, are high within the center, creating an opportunity for potentially a Democrat who's willing to go against the party line and reach across the aisle to, as we were saying, kind of create their own voice, maybe more of a centrist voice of reason, which it seems like people are looking for, right? It seems like common sense policy is very popular with the electorate.
Right. I mean, this is a challenge looking for the center and the question of whether or not this even exists, because we've had 40 years now of increased polarization in this country where not just elites in Congress are further apart from each other ideologically than they were, say, 50 years ago, but even the mass public. I mean, the mass public is much more polarized and much more partisan than they were 50 years ago. And so it's hard to talk about a middle that we're going to go and try and grab when it's not clear who's actually there. A lot of the people that are essentially swing voters are really swing voters, not because they're actually moderate, but because they're some of the least knowledgeable individuals in the country. The fascinating thing about polling is that the individuals that seem to be swayable in any particular election are the ones who are least interested in politics and least knowledgeable.
So just getting those people to turn out becomes the divider, huh? Now, as we finish up, Aaron, I'd just like to get your view. We're not going to hold you to it, but how does this all play out?
I mean, this looks like this is going to go for quite a while. There doesn't seem to have been any movement over the last couple of weeks. There is one way that Republicans could potentially do this unilaterally, and that would be to change the Senate rules, following the same path that they changed the Senate rules in order to get confirmations through. That would be a big move for Republicans to do, so I wouldn't expect that soon. But if you're talking about this in November, getting close to Thanksgiving, I think there'll be a real push within the Republican Party to just change the rules.
Interesting. Easier to just change the rules than find consensus. Always appreciate your insights. Aaron Dusso, thanks for joining us this morning.
And President Trump has posthumously awarded Charlie Kirk the Presidential Medal of Freedom. And he also signed a proclamation yesterday declaring October 14th a National Day of Remembrance for Charlie Kirk.
Meanwhile, the State Department said it has revoked visas from people who allegedly celebrated Kirk's assassination. NTD's Washington correspondent Mari Otsu has more.
It was a very moving ceremony. I think a real testament to how many lives Charlie Kirk is still touching. President Trump begins his remarks saying that it was supposed to be rainy and it turned out sunny, saying that God was watching. It also meant that the event was, which was supposed to take place inside in the East Room, was moved outside to the newly renovated Rose Garden, and the weather was indeed beautiful. And it was packed in celebration of what would have been Charlie Kirk's 32nd birthday. Erica Kirk, Charlie's widow, is accepting the honor on behalf of her late husband, who was assassinated a little over a month ago. Take a listen to President Trump honoring Charlie.
Charlie Kirk was a martyr for truth and for freedom. And from Socrates to think, and to St. Peter, from Abraham Lincoln to Martin Luther King, those who change history the most, and he really did, have always risked their lives for causes they were put on earth to defend.
The first official National Day of Remembrance for Charlie Kirk after both chambers of Congress approved resolutions to honor him last month, and the president is signing a proclamation declaring the same. Erica Kirk also eulogizes her husband, saying she intends to see his work through, and sharing her daughter's birthday wishes for their father. Take a look.
Honestly, President Trump, I have spent 7.5 years trying to find the perfect birthday gift for Charlie. And it's so difficult. And now I can say with confidence, Mr. President, that you have given him the best birthday gift he could ever have.
During the ceremony, the State Department is announcing that they've revoked the visas of 6 foreigners who celebrated Charlie Kirk's death.
Thanks to Mari for that report. Next, the nation's highest court will weigh in on race-based redistricting. We'll take a look at how this could impact the congressional makeup.
And the U.S. and China impose new port fees on each other as the U.S. works to encourage more domestic shipbuilding and counter unfair business practices coming out of China. We're going to have that and more. We'll be right back after the break. Welcome back to NTD Good Morning. The Department of Homeland Security says cartels are placing bounties on ICE and border agents.
Thousands of dollars are being offered, but the U.S. says it's not backing down at its enforcement operations. NTD's David Lamb has that story.
The Department of Homeland Security said on Tuesday it has obtained credible intelligence that Mexican criminals and cartels are involved putting bounties on federal agents. Criminal networks are allegedly instructing street gangs in Chicago to monitor, track, harass, and assassinate agents. Bounties range from $2,000 for doxing an agent, up to $10,000 for a kidnapping, and up to $50,000 for assassinating high-ranking officials. According to Homeland Security, Antifa groups in Portland and Chicago have been shielding cartel-linked individuals from deportation. Secretary Kristi Noem said U.S. agents are facing ambushes, surveillance, and death threats. But she also said, quote, "We will not back down from these threats, and every criminal, terrorist, and illegal alien will face American justice." Under Operation Midway Blitz, DHS says it has made over 1,500 arrests in Illinois, including pedophiles, gang members, and armed robbers. At least 1,000 suspects were arrested in Chicago alone. The operation was launched on September 8th, targeting criminal illegal immigrants. David Lamb, NTD News.
And Los Angeles County has declared a local emergency over federal immigration enforcement, a move rarely used outside natural disasters.
Supervisors voted 4-1 to allow measures such as an eviction moratorium for renters who can prove financial hardship tied to ICE operations. Supporters say aggressive federal raids have spread fear and disrupted communities.
The declaration also opens the door for state funding to support affected residents. Supervisor Catherine Barger cast the lone no vote, warning the move doesn't meet emergency standards and could invite lawsuits. Federal ICE raids have intensified across Southern California this year, leading to hundreds of arrests and widespread protests.
A Supreme Court ruling in September cleared the way for ICE to proceed with enforcement, rejecting claims of racial bias in the detentions.
The Supreme Court today will hear arguments about race-based redistricting. The case focuses on Louisiana, but could have ripple effects for several other states that plan to redraw their lines or have already done so, such as Texas. NTD's Melina Wisecup has the details. Melina, good to have you with us this morning. Tell us about this case and how it could impact Congress.
Hi, good morning, Steph. So like you mentioned, this is a Louisiana-focused case. The deal here, Steph, is that Louisiana initially had one black majority district, but was ordered by a lower court to create a second black majority district. Now, that's what led to this case. A group of non-black voters wants this to be reversed. The case focuses on whether race-based redistricting broadly should be done away with. Now, the ruling that the justices give on this will determine whether Louisiana keeps those two black majority districts or has to redraw them. Yet again, of course, this could also impact Louisiana's U.S. House seats. This is the second time the Supreme Court has asked the parties in this case to argue their points. This time, though, the focus of today's oral arguments will be on the broader constitutional implications.
Now, there's also a broader impact here, of course, with so many states now racing to redraw their lines after Texas and California's actions. How could this ruling impact the rest of the states and the majority in Congress more broadly?
Right. I think that's an important question as you see several states now redrawing their lines. Remember, when Texas redrew its map, it eliminated a coalition district, which is a district composed of a minority majority, which does address race. So there's a total of 26 districts with a black majority. If the court rules against race-based districts, it could make it easier, Steph, for red states to redraw maps, eliminating these types of districts and make it easier for those new maps, like the one created by Texas, to be upheld in court. We know Texas is facing lawsuits right now over its new map. And with the slim majority that Republicans have in the House, this could give Republicans a better chance to keep or even expand their majority in the 2026 midterm, Steph.
That's it. All these changes could be felt very soon with that election coming up quite soon. Thank you so much for this update. NTD Melina Wisecup. Okay, the Supreme Court yesterday rejected an appeal from Alex Jones and left in place the $1.4 billion judgment against him.
That's a very large judgment. The InfoWars host was found liable for defamation and inflicting emotional harm after describing the 2012 Sandy Hook Elementary School shooting as a hoax.
The judge in the Connecticut case issued a default ruling against Jones and his company in late 2021. The judge convened a jury to determine how much Jones would owe.
Jones has argued that the judge was wrong to find him liable without even holding a trial on the merits of the allegations. The Supreme Court justices did not comment on their order.
Lawyers for Jones told the justices that the plaintiffs would be unable to collect the entire judgment after he filed for bankruptcy in 2022.
Jones now appealing a separate $49 million judgment in a similar defamation lawsuit happening in Texas.
We'll keep you updated there. Now, Secretary of War Pete Hegseth and President Trump are defending a new Pentagon media policy that's sparking backlash from major news outlets.
Comes as the U.S. military conducts its fifth strike off Venezuela in recent weeks. Here are the details.
At least 30 major U.S. and international news organizations, including Reuters, the Associated Press, the New York Times, CNN, and Fox News, have refused to sign War Secretary Pete Hegseth's new media policy. Hegseth gave news organizations until Tuesday to accept new restrictions or lose their credentials entirely. Under the new policy, reporters must acknowledge that asking for or using certain types of unclassified information could label them a security risk. If that happens, their Pentagon press badges could be revoked. It's a move media groups say undermines the First Amendment. In a post on X, Hegseth said Pentagon access is a privilege, not a right. Hegseth says the changes simply bring the Pentagon in line with other military facilities.
Maybe the policy should look like the White House or other military installations where you have to wear a badge that identifies that you're press, or you can't just roam anywhere you want. It used to be, Mr. President, the press could go anywhere, pretty much anywhere in the Pentagon, the most classified area in the world.
President Trump has defended Hegseth's decision.
It bothers me to have soldiers and even high-ranking generals walking around with you guys on their sleeve, asking them because they can make a mistake, and a mistake can be tragic.
While the press debate unfolds, the Pentagon has confirmed a new military strike in international waters off Venezuela, killing 6 suspected narcotics traffickers aboard a small vessel. The Pentagon says it was the 5th such strike since September, part of an expanding campaign against drug cartels that the administration now labels narco-terrorist networks. Lawmakers from both parties and some former military lawyers are questioning their legality under U.S. law. Meanwhile, the U.S. buildup in the southern Caribbean continues, with F-35 fighter jets now stationed in Puerto Rico and 8 warships patrolling the region. Venezuelan President Nicolas Maduro has repeatedly alleged that the U.S. is hoping to drive him from power. Washington accuses him of links to drug trafficking and criminal groups, something Maduro denies.
The U.S. and China are opening a new front in their trade war, this time at sea. The two countries are now charging tit-for-tat port fees, a move that began yesterday.
That's while here at home, the DOJ is accusing a State Department employee of removing classified documents and meeting with CCP officials. NTD's Washington correspondent Jack Bradley has more.
The U.S. and China are now collecting new fees from each other's cargo ships. The charges impact shipping firms that transport everything from holiday gifts to crude oil. But China is exempting Chinese-built vessels from the tax. Earlier this year, the Trump administration planned to impose fees on Chinese ships to encourage domestic shipbuilding. And paving the way for that policy is an investigation under the Biden administration, which found that the Chinese Communist Party uses unfair policies to dominate maritime and shipbuilding sectors. This comes as China is tightening its rare earth mineral exports, and the U.S., in response, is threatening to tack on an additional 100% tariff on China by November 1st.
What the Chinese are doing is broad. It's on the whole world, a broad range of products that contain a tiny 0.1% of it is rare earth materials. And they're doing it to low-tech stuff. And we can't have a situation where the Chinese keep this regime in place where they want to have veto power over the world's high-tech supply chains.
President Trump says he's considering terminating deals with China regarding cooking oil and other trade elements because they're boycotting American soybeans, thereby harming American farmers. Trump calls China's move an economically hostile act and that the U.S. can easily produce its own cooking oil. China is instead purchasing more soybeans from Argentina.
Was China trying to draw a wedge between the U.S. and Argentina by buying soybeans from Argentina, not U.S. farmers?
I would say so.
And China on the port fees.
China
they've
likes to
increased
draw
port fees on
wedges.
U.S. ships, too.
The Chinese have, unfortunately, turned our soybean farmers into pawns. They're trying to manipulate them.
Meanwhile, there's a new case concerning Chinese espionage. A State Department employee is accused of removing classified documents and meeting with Chinese Communist Party officials. Ashley Tellis started working for the State Department in 2001. He's also a contractor with the Department of War. The Justice Department accuses Tellis of stealing classified documents, including military aircraft secrets. Federal prosecutors say he allegedly met with CCP officials at restaurants on multiple occasions, one time bringing a manila envelope, another time allegedly telling them about Iranian-Chinese relations and emerging technologies, and also allegedly receiving a gift bag from them. We'll have more on this case as it progresses. Reporting by Jack Bradley, NTD News.
Jack Bradley, great report there. China's new restrictions on rare earth exports are raising concerns in Europe.
European officials say the European Union is teaming up with the U.S. and other G7 partners to craft a united response to the Chinese Communist Party.
China, the world's top rare earth producer, just tightened its export rules, adding new elements and restrictions for semiconductor makers ahead of planned talks between President Trump and Xi Jinping.
The EU Trade Commissioner yesterday called the move unjustified, saying EU ministers meeting in Denmark see it as a critical concern.
He said the G7 could hold a video call this week to coordinate next steps, including potential plans to diversify supply chains and speed up new mining projects.
And the Danish foreign minister urged Europe to stay tough and united, but also to work closely with Washington Trump. Meanwhile, Trump has threatened China with 100% tariffs, sparking a brief sell-off on Wall Street. And President Trump says U.S. financial aid for Argentina depends on the outcome of this month's election. Trump's promised $20 billion will only go to Argentina if President Javier Milei wins and can advance his austerity program. At a White House meeting yesterday, Trump praised Milei as a leader with the right philosophy, adding that if he doesn't win, quote, "we're gone." The meeting and the economic rescue package made up of mainly currency swaps just weeks before Argentina's crucial midterms. Trump took to social media urging Argentines to back Milei in the polls so Washington can continue to help him, quote, achieve Argentina's incredible potential. Financial markets reacted sharply, with Argentine stocks falling after Trump's comments reignited uncertainty about the future U.S. backing. Despite the turbulence, Trump says he's confident Milei will perform well in the elections.
And in other news, a Florida congresswoman says she's about to receive JFK assassination documents straight from Russia's ambassador to the U.S.
Congresswoman Anna Paulina Luna said the 350-page document will be made available to the public as soon as she receives it.
She said her office will be working with former Washington Post reporter Jefferson Morley to ensure that happens.
Earlier this year, Representative Luna was appointed chairwoman of the task force on the declassification of federal secrets.
That task force aims to expand transparency and information surrounding the federal classification system, including historical events like the JFK assassination.
And Britain says it expects to see the full plans for a huge proposed Chinese embassy in London. This after China submitted blueprints with blacked out areas. Opponents of the proposal have warned that the site would be used as a Chinese spy base. It follows recent espionage warnings to politicians from the UK's security services. NTD's international correspondent Malcolm Hudson has more from London.
China wants to build a huge new embassy in London, which would be its largest diplomatic site in all of Europe, built on the site of a 2-century-old building near the Tower of London. But there are concerns the proposed embassy could be used as a spy base, given its close location to Parliament and London's major economic centres. Warnings were raised by both British and American politicians. British Housing Minister Steve Reed will be deciding if the site should go ahead. The UK government has said it expects to make a final decision by October 21st, after it pushed back an August deadline. The government blames Beijing for withholding details on the blueprints. In August, the planning consultancy working for the Chinese regime said the regime felt it would be inappropriate to provide full internal layout plans. Reed said he expects to see the embassy plans in full, without any redacted areas, before he makes a decision. However, the timing is problematic for Prime Minister Keir Starmer's government. It was accused in recent weeks of downplaying the threat China poses to Britain's national security by allowing a trial of 2 British men charged with spying for China to collapse. Furthermore, Britain's domestic spy agency MI5 on Monday issued a rare public warning to members of parliament that they are being targeted by spies from China, Russia and Iran. MI5 warned politicians and their staff to look out for spies seeking to elicit information from them, such as by blackmail or phishing attacks, cultivating long-term and deep relationships with them, or making donations to influence their decisions. Security Minister Dan Jarvis said this guidance will help politicians and civil servants understand the threats.
It also provides simple, effective steps for individuals at risk to protect themselves, their teams, and the integrity of our democratic processes.
Starmer has sought to improve ties with China since taking office last year, but London and Beijing have repeatedly traded spying accusations, with British security services warning of Chinese attempts to infiltrate its political and business communities. Malcolm Hudson, NTD News.
Up ahead, California is making a major move on gun sales, targeting one of the state's most popular handguns. The law aims to prevent certain firearms from being easily modified.
And a South Side activist says Democratic leaders have failed black communities, sparking a new movement called Chicago Flips Red. We're going to have that story and more. We'll be right back. Welcome back to NTD Good Morning. I'm Carrie Dunst. If you're just joining us now, here are some of today's top headlines. Israel has identified the bodies of 3 more hostages released by the Hamas terror group. Israeli media says that a fourth body returned yesterday may not be a hostage at all, and reports say that Israel may open the Rafah crossing between Egypt and Gaza after previously limiting aid over delays in returning the hostage bodies. The remains of 20 hostages remain in Hamas captivity. The Senate failed again yesterday to pass a measure to fund the federal government, failing 49 to 45. The Republican-backed resolution needed 60 votes to pass, with most Democrats opposing it. Since October 1st, the Trump administration has dismissed more than 4,100 federal employees, while the Pentagon confirms troops have been paid after $8 billion was redirected by President Trump. President Trump says he'll soon release a list of Democrat programs to be permanently cut. And President Trump has posthumously awarded Charlie Kirk the Presidential Medal of Freedom. Charlie's widow, Erica Kirk, accepted the honor yesterday on behalf of her late husband. Trump also signed a proclamation declaring October 14th, which is Kirk's birthday, National Day of Remembrance for Charlie Kirk. Meanwhile, the State Department said it has revoked visas from 6 people who allegedly celebrated Kirk's assassination. And the Supreme Court is expected to hear arguments today about race-based redistricting. The case focuses on Louisiana's plans to redraw district lines, but could also have ripple effects for several other states. If the court rules against race-based districts, it would make it easier for red states to redrawn maps to be upheld in court and increase the chances for a GOP majority during the 2026 midterm elections. Those are this morning's top headlines. With that, Steph, over to you.
Thank you, Carrie. Next, the Department of Justice has unveiled the takedown of one of the largest global human trafficking and cyber fraud networks ever. In an unsealed indictment, the founder of Cambodia-based Prince Holding Group, Chen Zhe, has been charged with wire fraud conspiracy and money laundering conspiracy. He's currently being sought by authorities. His victims were allegedly instructed to transfer cryptocurrency to be invested, but the assets were stolen instead. The DOJ says the schemes were carried out by trafficked workers who were threatened with violence. The department has seized over $14 billion worth of Bitcoin as part of its enforcement operation. It's the largest forfeiture in DOJ history. And in an update to another case of targeted violence, the suspect accused of setting fire to Pennsylvania Governor Josh Shapiro's home earlier this year has pleaded guilty. 38-year-old Cody Allen Balmer pleaded guilty to all counts: attempted homicide, aggravated arson, and terrorism. Balmer was accused of firebombing the governor's home on the first night of Passover this year on April 13th. The man faces 25 to 50 years in prison and a fine of up to $100,000. Following the attack, Shapiro said, quote, "This kind of violence is becoming far too common in our society." He added that he does not care if it's coming from one particular side or the other. Tensions continue to flare in Chicago as the legal fight over deploying the National Guard plays out in the courts. An appeals court recently ruled the Trump administration can keep federalized Guard members in Illinois, but cannot deploy them.
For a take on the situation from Chicago residents, NTD's Daniel Monahan spoke with the organization Chicago Flips Red.
Flipping Chicago red, we flipping Chicago red.
Chicago Flips Red defines itself as a grassroots movement aimed at empowering black communities and advocating for economic and political independence. Co-founder Zoe Lee says her activism began after the city demolished her family's building in 2017.
Finally, when I realized I was going to continue to get ignored while I was there, I told them that if they did not settle this case, I would flip Chicago red.
Lee argues that Democratic leadership has failed black communities in Chicago.
This is a Democratic stronghold, blue stronghold, dictatorship. Everything that they say Donald Trump is exactly what this machine is here. And everybody's connected, from the judges, the lawyers, the prosecutors, the city council, the teachers union, the police union. Is just one big fraternity sorority that's dedicated to the machine.
She supports bringing in the National Guard to Chicago.
We have a genocide in our own community, in the city of Chicago, on the south side and the west side, and it's been there, it's normalized.
Lee says President Trump is the only one addressing those issues.
And it's unfortunate that that Trump has to do it, but Trump has to do it. He can't help that he's white. He can't help that he came from a privileged life. You know, he can't help that he was a businessman. He can't help, but he can't help any of that. But what he saw was, I think, what anybody else saw was an issue with the whole United States of America. We were going to lose this country.
She also criticizes the city's handling of the migrant crisis, saying it's displaced longtime residents.
We're losing businesses by the hour. Regular Chicago citizens can't even get an apartment. They can't even get a house because everything is designed to only take care of these illegals because the city is paying it.
Lee believes illegal immigration is being weaponized politically against Trump.
They're using illegal aliens, but they're all putting it on Donald Trump, who literally inherited a crisis, and he's the only one that does not blame it on it. He doesn't say, well, I inherited this. Nah, I'm going in there and I'm going to take care of it.
She also accuses state leaders of ignoring community concerns.
And we don't even know. And then when we go to our elected officials like Pritzker and Brandon Johnson and Kwame Raoul, they act like what we're saying is a lie. They're literally getting on TV, doing these press conferences, and acting like everything that we're saying is an outright lie, knowing that everything we're saying is true.
Illinois Governor J.B. Pritzker recently warned that federal agents in Chicago could face future prosecution, speaking on Fox News.
The tables will turn someday. These people should recognize that maybe they're not going to get prosecuted today, although we're looking at doing that, but they may get prosecuted after the Trump administration for the things that they did because the statute of limitations won't have run.
Homeland Security criticized those remarks, calling threats to prosecute law enforcement for enforcing the law disgusting. The agency said Pritzker's rhetoric is fueling attacks on federal agents. Daniel Monahan, NTD News.
And up ahead, global cybercrime is projected to cost more than $10.5 trillion annually. We'll speak with a cybersecurity expert for tips on keeping your family safe after this. Welcome back to NTD Good Morning. Global cybercrime is projected to cost $10.5 trillion annually, according to Cybersecurity Ventures.
And while sophisticated crime organizations target corporations and governments, individuals also succumb to all kinds of scams and hacks. Joining us to educate is Eric O'Neill. He's a former FBI counterintelligence operative and a cybersecurity expert. He's also author of the new book, Spies, Lies, and Cybercrime, Cybersecurity Tactics to Outsmart Hackers and Disarm Scammers. Eric, thank you so much for joining us. Such an important topic and very excited to get into it. But before we do get into personal vigilance, you have such an interesting background. I'd love for you to talk a little bit about your first book and your first career before getting into cyber.
Certainly. Carrie, Stephanie, it's great to be on NTD. My background started in the FBI. I was an undercover operative. My job was in counterterrorism and counterintelligence. So counterterrorism, catching terrorists. Counterintelligence is catching spies. So I was an FBI spy hunter. And my final case in the FBI was to go undercover to catch a spy named Robert Hansen, who was a 25-year veteran of the FBI, who ended up being the top Russian mole in the entire U.S. intelligence community. And my final case, because I left the FBI after, was to go undercover in the most unique case the FBI had ever run. I was sent into FBI headquarters as myself to catch a spy. And I don't think we'll ever have a case quite like that. And I managed to accomplish what was finding a unicorn, getting the smoking gun that led to his arrest and an easy conviction.
A full 007 kind of operation.
Hey, something like that,
It's amazing. Wow.
You must have so many insights, and with all of that experience, what led you to commit yourself and work on cybersecurity?
Well, you know, the work that I was doing with Hansen, with the overt job, the covert job was to find information and evidence that would lead to his arrest. The overt job was we were building cybersecurity for the FBI, and I've always had my hands on a keyboard. So as I left the FBI, I practiced law and national security. I founded my own company that does competitive intelligence, and then just recently founded a company that does cybersecurity. I've always kept my mind on what is the most damaging thing for people, and especially as I'm lecturing and talking and I'm on stage. And right now, that is cybercrime. I mean, you open this by saying that cybercrime is costing the population of the world about 10.5 trillion. That's actually underreported because most companies don't always report. It's really around 14 trillion this year. By next year, it could be 18 trillion. So if you were to count cybercrime, the dark web, right? Money that's flowing into the pockets of these new cybercrime syndicates as a gross domestic product, say the dark web was a place, which it sort of is. Right now, cybercrime would be the third largest economy on earth.
Wow.
Absolutely. So it would go the US and then China, and then cybercrime, dark web cybercrime is already more than Germany and Japan put together.
That's unbelievable. You've done a great job of outlining the scope of the problem, in its totality. But what about the scope of the problem for individuals, not for sophisticated corporations and governments, et cetera?
Exactly, Kerry. That is why I wrote the book. So this book, if you're a chief information security officer at a company, you're going to pick it up and you're going to learn from it. But what I really wanted to do is create a book that reads like a true crime thriller. And teaches you as you're reading all the ways that cyber criminals are coming after us. And what I did is I went back to my origins at the FBI, how I learned counterintelligence, the FBI Academy. So you learn about deception, impersonation, infiltration, confidence schemes, exploitation and destruction. I call it diced, with stories about how cyber criminals are coming after you and me. It's very personal. We have this misconception that what criminals, not just cyber criminals, but cyber spies, what they're doing is using computers to somehow get in their computer. They're not. They're using computers as a way to access us, to fool us into handing over our data.
So paint a picture for us. What are some of the top kinds of scams that you'd see?
So right now, one of the biggest scams going around is using AI in a very clever way to deceive families. So you might get a call, and I'm hearing this from people as I'm talking about the book. I'm hearing this story, the same story or variation from people all over the country. You get a call from your daughter or your sister or your mother, right? And it's frantic. I got into a car wreck and I'm here in prison. I hit someone, they're really hurt, and I need your help. And the next person who gets on the phone is the public defender who says, if you don't pay bail quickly, then your loved one, your daughter, your sister, right, is going to spend the next week in jail. And this is the only phone call she gets, right? So this is a huge scam. What attackers are doing is they're learning about you by going through your social media. They find someone that's connected to you, like, say, your daughter. It's usually a daughter or a son. They're calling the parents or they're calling the grandparents. And they're using AI to create a clone of the voice. So you're hearing someone that you believe is your family member, but it's not. It's just AI fooling you. And they create that pressure situation. You feel like, oh, I better pay quickly. And it's usually send a wire, right? You think you're sending it to a defense attorney, and then you finally get in touch with the person, and you find out that it was all a scam. It was a complete scam. And families are losing thousands of dollars to this and many different variations of the scam. And that's a way that attackers are using this time-honored tradition of espionage in a modern environment to fool us into, there isn't even a single bit of code. It's just fooling us into sending our money right into their wallets.
So what could people do to be vigilant that these scams are targeting them?
Well, the number one thing that people have to do is be aware of the scam. And that's one of the reasons I wrote the book. That's one of the reasons I take stages all over the world and talk about this. Awareness is what leads to knowing the skills to defend against it. So you get that call. And what I've been telling families is have a code word. In my family, we use the first line from a silly poem, right? Okay. No one's going to guess that. And I can say, you can even say, what's the code word? That's the world we live in now with deepfakes. And if they can't say the code word, then maybe it's a fake. And because this is growing, when cyber criminals find that stuff works, they keep replicating it, and it's just going to get bigger and bigger. And you've probably seen, if you're scrolling through social media, what's happening with, say, Sora 2 and these different AI video creation channels where anyone can create an incredibly deceptive deepfake. You're seeing Mr. Rogers, right, from Mr. Rogers' Neighborhood, and I'm Gen X, so I remember watching that show, but doing all sorts of crazy things, and it looks hyper real. It's not. And if anyone can use AI to create deepfakes, and you know cyber criminals are doing it. So we need to be able to not succumb to the pressure of the moment, to take a step back, to analyze the situation, and find the scam.
Now let's look at what advice you might have for some of the other vulnerable people in our lives, the children, elderly folks. How can they learn to adapt in this cybercrime world?
Yeah, Stephanie, that is a great question because the most vulnerable are the most targeted. So children are targeted because they have pristine credit. Right? Your child has never gotten a credit card. They have a perfect credit rating, right? And so attackers will go after them for identity theft, but they will also go after them for, I've written an entire chapter on exploitation. There are just terrible, mean people out there, and they will go after your children. They'll do it in video game chat rooms. They'll do it on Discord. They'll do it however they can access them, Instagram, social media. And what they'll do is they will become their friends, and they will get them to put themselves in a compromising situation. With teenagers, it can sometimes be send me a naked picture. And then what they do is they exploit them. They say, you've done this. I know your entire family. I'm going to send this out to everyone you know if you don't send me money. Go get your parents' credit card. Go buy gift cards and read them out to me. They find different ways to get this. Get an Apple Pay account. Send me money. And it can be devastating to a child. It can cause depression. They can feel that they're being cyberbullied. And in some cases, it's led to teen suicide. So it's terrible. And with elderly people, they can get fooled really quickly by the grandparent scheme. You know, grandma, I'm trapped. I'm in a hotel. Someone stole my wallet and phone. I'm using a friend's phone. I need you to wire me money right away. And they've also been very susceptible to finance and romance fraud, right? Romance fraud is where someone who's alone and lonely believes they've fallen in love with someone online, and there's always some crisis. You know, I crashed my car. I just need some help. I want to come visit you. Wire me some money. Or finance fraud. Invest in this new scheme. And they will actually show them websites where their $1,000, their test investment, is now gone up 300%. Now, and I tell a story in a book about a pensioner who invested his entire pension with a fraudulent account. And when he said, I'd like to pull some money out to take my family on vacation, the attacker just disappears. And he was left penniless.
Well, we appreciate so much you sharing these tips. If nothing else, the code word. What a genius and simple thing to do.
And there's much more in your book, which is I'm looking forward to reading.
The answers to how to defend against all of this, you know, primarily don't give in to the pressure, think before you act, and all of the different cybersecurity strategies that someone can use to protect themselves in the first place. It's all in there.
Eric O'Neill, thank you so much for joining. The book is Spies, Lies, Cybercrime, Cybersecurity Tactics to Outsmart Hackers and Disarm Scammers. Such a great conversation. Thank you.
Thank you so much.
And we do have to wrap up our show right now. Thanks for joining us so much. I'm Carrie Dudds.
I'm Stephanie Cox. See you soon.